Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Two Chiefs, One Mic. I am Scott Hughes.
And I'm Mike Hawkins. And we're back here, I think, episode number 7, I believe. We've had a lot going on. Scott, I know you've been busy traveling all over the country, giving a couple speeches and been interviewed a few times. I've gone to a few places, taught a class, and we'll be getting out of Michigan here for a while, another week or two, to go to a conference. But today, we're excited because we get to have another guest on. And it's an outstanding story, outstanding person. And I'm going to let Scott, you introduce Lisa, our guest today, and go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I've been teaching for the last 12 years or 13 years, I guess, for Caliber Press. And one of the classes that we're known for teaching is street survival. And every year, Cleveland, Ohio hosts our street survival training as part of their Police Memorial Week. And Cleveland does a bang-up job with their Police Memorial Week, from a steak dinner at their lodge hall to a tattoo with drum and bugle corps to a parade through town, and then the memorial itself. They just do a really nice job. And probably 5 or 6 times now over the last 12 or 13 years, I've been invited up to be the instructor for the street survival seminar. And obviously I've met some friends in Cleveland. And one of the things that makes the Cleveland class so unique is we always look for folks to come in who can tell a story or can relate to some of the concepts that we teach in street survival. So I had 2 different individuals reach out to me independent, and they told me about Lisa Budny's story. And they told me about her husband, Mike, who was a Cleveland police officer, a cop's cop, SWAT team, sniper. I mean, this dude is like a cop's cop. Like he's the man, right? And they tell me this story about him committing suicide 3 years after he retired. And my heart broke. I'm like, what? And they said, you have to hear Lisa tell the story. She's at a point in her life where she wants to tell this story because what she went through and how her story, her husband Mike's story, can save lives, and it can help police officers and first responders navigate these crazy waters that occur with suicide. So I reached out to Lisa, and I was telling you before we went on air that I talked to her for 45 minutes. And, I almost had to pull the car over a couple of times. I was just so just taken back by her story, and I want to let her kind of walk us through that. So she spoke this year at Street Survival in Cleveland, and we had about 100 people in the room, and she did a phenomenal job. It was her first time ever speaking in front of a group. This is her first podcast, and I was extremely impressed with her relatability to the crowd. And there were a lot of tears in that room. And whenever I see cops with tears in their eyes, I know that we're making a difference. And I told Lisa that day, I told her in a phone call, I told her before we went on air, that her getting the story out is undoubtedly going to positively impact not only police officers and first responders' lives, but families as well. So it's my honor to introduce Lisa Budny to the Two Chiefs, One Mic podcast. Lisa is coming to us from her log cabin where she has stressed that the Wi-Fi can sometimes get a little tricky. So we may not be able to see her at all times, but the audio should stick with it. So Lisa, thanks for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Walk us through how you and Mike met, how long you were married, kind of walk us through his career, and then we'll go from there, if you don't mind.
Sure. Mike and I met we're in Cleveland. He was a Cleveland police officer, as you mentioned, and I was at the time a parole officer, and we met Cleveland Police Memorial Week on Thursday of Police Memorial, and we actually met in that ballroom where your training occurs. So at that time, it was very special to me to be back with that class and speaking in front of them, and that's where he and I met. We dated for 2 years before he asked me to marry him. We were engaged for 1.5 years and then married for 16. And I became a police officer during that time and got promoted to lieutenant. And we enjoyed life. And then his father got sick with Parkinson's disease. So we were struggling with getting his father into an assisted living home. and we were watching his father decline. And relatively speaking, his father was young to get Parkinson's. He was just in his early 60s, and it was rapidly progressing. So one day, Mike started off in the 1st District. He was an Army veteran, Big Red 1 out of Kansas. He served in the first Gulf War, and he then went to Cleveland, worked in the 1st District, then the gang narcotics unit, and his ultimate goal was to work for SWAT, and he got that, and he actually became one of the SWAT snipers. And he went out on every call up. He went to every warrant. He loved it, but he balanced his life really well. He was a hard worker, but didn't live to work. He worked out every single day.
Lisa, let me stop. Oh, I'm sorry. Real quick. So you stated that you became a police officer while you were, I believe you said while you were dating, but
Yes.
you did not work for the same agency. That's correct?
Correct. I worked for a different agency.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify that.
That's okay.
So you were saying he goes out on all the call outs. He works out all the time. I'm sorry.
Yes. Took good care of himself, but we're watching his father decline and watching some of his father's symptoms with Parkinson's. And one night while Mike was out on a call up, he called me afterwards, which was unusual. We had an agreement that if we were going to call each other while we were working, we knew it was important. So we only called if it was an emergency. We would text and check on each other, but he called right after and he said, "Lisa, we were just on this warrant or call up, and I had the rifle and we made entry and my finger started twitching." And his first thought was Parkinson's, because we were dealing with his father with Parkinson's, and we know that it can be hereditary. So I said, well, just take it easy, come home, and we'll talk about it. So I stayed up, and I knew that he had been stressed, and I know that various medications and caffeine and all of that can make you twitch. So we talked about it, and he said, yeah, but my legs have been cramping also, and my feet and my hands have been clenching. So he felt that he was exhibiting the same symptoms that his father had. We went to university hospitals in Cleveland, went to Cleveland Clinic, and got a second opinion. And sure enough, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, early onset. So Cleveland.
What age, Lisa? How old was he when
I
this
believe
happened?
when he was diagnosed, he was 45. Yeah. So, or actually, no, he would have been 46, because then he took medicine, had no symptoms at all, like none. The medication was helping. He felt good, continued working in SWAT. And then finally, the medicine wasn't working as well. So I think it was over about a year, Cleveland very graciously took care of Mike. And until he could retire, they kept him in the SWAT unit, and he did payroll, training, documentation, dealt with the vehicles. Just very lucky to maintain his job where he was. But of course, it was heartbreaking for him. He would have worked as long as he could, and especially at that job.
So he's diagnosed. I just want to make sure I heard you right. He's diagnosed, and for a year, he's unable to participate now in the SWAT and the call outs and things. But the city of
Correct.
Cleveland put him in an administrative role on the SWAT team.
Correct.
Had Cleveland not had a full-time SWAT team, let's say he was in, just patrol or whatnot, and they didn't have a full-time unit, what do you think they would have done do you think they would have done anything different?
They possibly could have put him on desk duty in a district, something like that, where they're in the station dealing, reports and stuff like that. I do think they would have done that.
So if he worked for a suburban, and that's great. I mean, God bless Cleveland for doing that. Had he worked for a suburban department like Mike, you or I mean, this could have been that could have been a different story. So I only say that, but that's kudos for Cleveland for doing that. So please continue.
It was.
Yeah, please continue.
So they took like administrative tasks that multiple SWAT employees did, and gave them all to Mike. So it was kind of like he just did all of that instead of the sergeant, and they were very, very good to him. I mean, we were blessed. So he was able to retire after 48 years with his military time. And unfortunately, when he retired, he was bored, thought about getting a job, didn't get just felt like he couldn't work. And then his father started to get worse. We ended up having to put his father in a nursing home. During that period, my mother died tragically. She was killed by a drunk driver. So we had a lot of stress with that, and his symptoms amped way up when my mom was killed. And so he was retired. I was still working, and I was getting ready to retire from my agency. And his father kept falling and getting worse, and Mike was getting worse at the same time. Now, during this probably 2 years before Mike committed suicide in 2023, 2 years prior to that, I started realizing that he was struggling. And we did everything you can do, and we did everything that you're supposed to do. He had a therapist, he had a psychiatrist, he had 2 doctors on board. He worked out every single day. He had good friends. We used a peer support group, which is in Cleveland. They checked in on him all the time, just did everything that you would think. And when he was really struggling, I would take him to the hospital, but he would deny. When asked, he would deny that he was going to hurt himself, but he would say things like, "I would never leave you alone." So that created some extra stress for me because I was concerned that for my own safety, not that we had no domestic issues at all, but I do believe we have no children, and I don't think he wanted to leave me alone struggling with the loss of him after the loss of my mother. So I was not afraid of him, but there was some extra stress there. And every time I would come home and couldn't find him, so it led to me having some issues myself. And I retired from Beechwood, and I was working for the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office in the cold case unit. And that led me up into the time where Mike really started to deteriorate. So I was hired at a law firm. I was getting ready for work one morning, and something just didn't feel right. It wasn't like a sense of doom, but something wasn't right. I could hear that my dogs were pacing downstairs. I slept separate from Mike because he moved a lot in his sleep with the Parkinson's, and he didn't sleep well with me there. He needed to be, uncovered, and I slept in the guest bedroom. So I woke up, I got ready for work. I didn't think much of it other than I felt uneasy. And I came downstairs, my dogs were waiting at the bottom of the steps, and I looked to the left and I saw that all the blinds in the family room were pulled shut. And we didn't shut the blinds. We had a beautiful backyard, and we always left the blinds open so that we could see our property. And my stomach just kind of turned at that point. I still couldn't place it, but I knew something was not okay. And then when I looked in his bed, I saw his leg braces. And like I said, he was an Army veteran and just very regimented. And if he got out of bed, he made his bed. And he would have gotten up that morning every morning he got up before me to take care of the dogs so that I would not have to, and I could get ready for work. And it was just part of his routine. So when I saw the bed unmade and no lights were on, I called out for him. There was no response. And when I looked in the bathroom, we had a double vanity. I saw a notebook open. And that was it. I knew that the day had come. I hate to say it, but it literally felt like the day had come. And I didn't even have to read it. And I fell to my knees, was screaming, no, God help me. And I couldn't dial 911. I had my phone, and I couldn't do it. Like all of my, like any other high stress that we experience, you lose your fingers, everything, nothing was working. I couldn't hear. I felt like I was screaming, but it was like in a tunnel. And I dialed 911. The dispatcher did a great job, but she wanted me to read the note, which I did not want to read. But she wanted to make sure that, did he say where he went? Did he say what he was going to do? Because they were responding. And I said, I just know that he probably did this, but you need to get here because you might be able to save him. Because this was like 7:45 in the morning, probably. And I didn't know when he had left. And I didn't want to find him. So I was crawling, and I didn't want to leave the bathroom. I didn't want to find him. Like I mentioned in the training, one of the things I talk about with how I've struggled is I call them a slideshow. When you're a police officer, you go on all of these calls, and you're so proud of how you handle them. And that's why you love being a cop. You're one of the few people that can do that job. And as other people are running out of a building, you're running in. And so when you then experience falling to your knees, and I fell to my knees when my mom died, it's an overwhelming sense of helplessness and weakness. And as police officers, it's even harder to accept that when that's happening, because you have been the one to handle so much. So I stood up and I read the first line of his suicide note, and it just said, "Lisa, I'm sorry, but I have to go. The depression is just too bad." And I fell to my knees again, and she wanted me to go and see if his car was there. And I did it, but I did not want to find him. So but I was crawling on my hands and knees, and I got to the garage. I opened the garage door and I could smell fresh air. So I knew that the back man door was open, and it was fall. So, fall air just has a very specific scent to it that now when I smell that, it's a problem. And I looked and I saw that his truck was still in the driveway. So I opened the garage door, and now I also was hanging up on them. I was that like nightmare caller. I kept hanging up on 911. I called my brother. I asked him to come over. And he was on his way. And then I specifically remember the flagpole banging, and I could hear the carabiners, hitting the flagpole, and that sound, flagpoles making noise, bothers me. And then a school bus was pulling up, and I started screaming for help. And I remember yelling, "Help me, God help me," over and over. And nobody came to help. And I didn't want to look. I'm glad I didn't. I just stayed where I was, and it took 16 minutes for the cops to get there, which I'm not saying that that's, a bad thing. I do live in a rural area, but 3 minutes seems like a lot. My knees were bleeding because I had been crawling on my hands and knees, didn't have shoes on. It was cold out. And when they got there, they walked up very calmly. And one of my points with all of this is, and I want them to be calm, obviously, but one of the points I wanted the class to get was how you show up matters. And we don't always realize that. And I remember they knew I was a police officer, and they knew that Mike was a police officer. So they asked me about guns, and that's when I had seen that the gun that he left on the bathroom sink was missing. But I specifically remember how...
Lisa.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Because I know where you're going now with the story, because I heard it. I want to pause for 1 second and just ask you, before you get into the officer's response, just to clarify just a few points. He retired on November 13th of 2020, correct?
Yes.
This is November 13th of 2023. So it's
yes.
3 years to the day he retired.
Yes.
Tell me what you told me on the phone about this that date. You think he had that date picked? You think that was done by?
Absolutely. I believe he had it planned for a while. Yes. He had left instructions for me on how to take care of certain things in the house that I found later, handwritten notes. And when I went upstairs into the room where we kept insurance and stuff like that, I found a second suicide note, and he had everything laid out. And it was a room that we didn't go in often, but he had so many things written down on how to, when to replace this, when to replace that, who to call. It was everything, how to start the snowblower, just things that just to take, help me.
So you, oh man, you call 911. You call your brother. You can't walk. You're not. You're just. I can't even imagine. It takes 16 minutes for them to get there, and that's not a slam on anybody.
No,
as you've
it's
already
not.
stated. That's just. You live in rural America. That's just the.
Yep.
It is what it is, I guess. But so the officers arrive on scene. You said that they knew you were both police officers. Were there prior calls to the house for like medical issues, or how did they know you were they take home police car? How did they know you were law enforcement?
So the dispatcher asked, why do you think he did this? And I started to tell her, he's got Parkinson's, he's got depression, he's got bad anxiety. And I said, we are retired police officers, and he probably
Okay.
has a pistol. I wanted the officers responding to know that to be safe. And I said, I don't think he would ever hurt an officer, but you never know. When they do this, they're not in the right frame of mind. But I wanted the responding officers to know that. And I used to work for that sheriff's office. So some of the dispatchers working knew me and knew that I was a police officer. So as they were responding, the dispatcher did a great job of telling them that we were both police officers and that weapons were in the home.
And then you, the other thing we I think it's important for our folks to know it before we get to this officer who arrives on scene first. You made a comment that you knew he was going to do this.
Yes.
From November 13th of 2020 till November 13th of 2023, you knew he was going to do this. And you mentioned very briefly that you were going to a psychologist and you were doing, I think you said, all the things you're supposed to do, so that folks kind of who haven't been through this or don't know what all the things are you're supposed to do are. Would you mind maybe just taking a couple minutes, if you're comfortable with it? What got you to the point where you had to go see psychologist? And again, you kind of mentioned briefly, I think your words were his condition started getting worse, and your mom's incident, and then his own father's incident. Like, walk us through how did you know? Like, walk us through what made you take him to a psychologist? What was he doing? Because I think that's
Sure.
important for folks to know who might be going through their own kind of issues. Like, I know now because I heard Lisa say that, I know what this means.
Sure. So he he had an attitude of, nothing that he does matters because the end result is going to be Parkinson's. So he had a very negative attitude, which was very unusual for him. He lost enjoyment in stuff that he used to do. And part of that was because of the Parkinson's, because he couldn't walk as far. He was in pain. So part of that was medical, but a lot of it was depression. And he watched his father decline and saw his future. By watching his father, he saw what his future looked like. He didn't go out with friends as much. You just could tell. And he literally lost the light in his eyes. You could see that something was wrong. Just a very negative attitude. Still very loving. And anytime you would ask him, he would say he's okay. He would go to family functions and still talk. He was a great, he loved conversation and he remembered everything about people. But he was almost embarrassed by the way he walked, and he was embarrassed that he had to quit. We were at a retirement party and he had a panic attack at the retirement party, and that caused him a great deal of embarrassment. And we had left, and then we came back, and then we left, and he didn't know what to do. And then you could see just a drastic change in his personality, hopelessness. But he would always say the right things to the doctors and to me.
So Lisa, go ahead, Mike. So I guess that's the point. The police officers, they know what to say, they know what not to say. And both being police officers, how difficult was it for you to convince him, or how difficult was it for him to decide to go get some help or some treatment? Because cops are the same, right? They want to be able to say they can handle it all and put up that front. But how was that with your story?
Fortunately, he was not a very stubborn person to begin with. So when I started going to therapy when my mother died, and I found a really good therapist, and she deals a lot with police and fire. And I was telling him stories about her, and I said, you really should go talk to her. And if you don't feel comfortable with both of us going to her, I'll find somebody else. But she's really good with talking to police and fire. She gets it. She's not judgmental. So that part was easy. The psychiatrist was a little bit different. We unfortunately had a negative experience with a doctor. She said that depression, she's a specialty doctor for Parkinson's, and she actually said that the depression part of Parkinson's isn't in her wheelhouse, which I find hard to believe because that's one of the main symptoms of Parkinson's. So there were some speed bumps along the way, but it was more of he had a great he wanted to try to help himself, and he and he didn't want me to be unhappy, and he wanted to still be productive and have a purpose. And he, the therapy did help. The peer support group did help. I firmly believe that everything we did kept him alive longer. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I just think that with him, the physical ailments and the physical pain and not being able to do anything that you enjoy anymore is what ultimately made him decide to do it. But just the depression, we were getting ready to do the deep brain stimulation that they do with Parkinson's, but I was trying to get him in. I'm an advocate for ketamine treatment for soldiers and veterans and first responders, and we were starting to look into that, and unfortunately we never got to that point. But he wasn't stubborn, and I had to be very cautious in how I spoke to him about any of this, because I didn't want to seem like I was lecturing or nagging. I knew, this is a very proud man, a veteran, a police officer. He was very humble, and I just had to be in a very loving way and not a lieutenant way, tell him, hey, there's these things that we need to do. And I got his therapist on board, who was my therapist, and just tried to get him to do these different things. Fortunately, he always worked out. So that wasn't difficult to do, to get him to take good care of himself. Quitting drinking, he wasn't a big drinker to begin with, but getting him to quit drinking was easy because it made him feel worse. So we were very fortunate that he was emotionally intelligent, and you went to him with something, and he didn't have he didn't have a big ego. He was a very humble man, and he wanted to do everything that he could. And I think that those things did keep him alive longer. I wish that ketamine would have been one of the things we tried, because I think that could have helped. But ultimately, he did this because of Parkinson's. And had he not had Parkinson's, I think he would still be with us today.
So that's thank you very much for sharing that. I think that's important for folks to hear. That's I can't imagine. So we're back November 13th, 2023. You say you can smell the air, the autumn air, and I live in Ohio too. Mike's in Michigan, so we know what that smell is. And I'm sure you'll get to this, but there are still things that bother you to this day. You mentioned the flagpole, the metal clinging of the flagpole, that smell, the school bus. I think those are some of the effects that we don't always think about. Is how does suicide impact the survivors?
Yes.
Appreciate you sharing that. So, and I want to come back to that. I want to go back though to that day. So because I think this is important too. So 16 minutes, which it is what it is. We understand that part of it. Officer shows up, and then you started to talk about how the officers who got to the scene kind of how they made you feel and what they were doing. And I think this is a very big takeaway. So I'll pause there. Why don't you pick that, if you don't mind, just pick that story
Sure.
up from when
So
he or she arrives on scene.
Yep. As I mentioned, how you show up matters as an officer, and I will never forget the faces of these deputies that showed up for this call, and the trooper that I dealt with my mom. It's just, those incidents are just burned into your brain, and that's where the professionalism comes into play, as well as, obviously CIT and just wanting to help people, but the empathy and the professionalism. One of the deputies held my hand the entire time. And as I mentioned in the training, I'm not telling cops to hold hands with victims or survivors, but I know that he knew I was a retired cop and that Mike was a retired cop. And I think he felt comfortable enough. He was safe and comfortable enough, and I'm on the ground hysterical, and he just held my hand the whole time and walked me to the ambulance. And I will never forget that. And it made a difference. It's when you're going through that, it's human voice and human contact are huge. And when you're cold and bleeding, and for him to reach out, I will never forget. And professionalism and empathy, and you don't have to hold hands, you don't have to hug, nothing like that. But they apologized and they said, they're sorry, and they explained that he was deceased. And then, I went to my brother's house and they did the rest of their work. So it is important, those calls, as we don't, I remember every suicide that I went on, and that it's part of my slideshow, and you don't know when all of that is going to add up. I worked in a relatively safe city, but we had, busy calls, and I explained it as, when we're born, we're given a cup or a glass, and as police officers or military or firefighters or whatever emergency service, every call we go on is a drop in that cup. And it's fine because we're built to deal with it, and we have functional anxiety, and we love the adrenaline dump, and that's what gets us, that's what helps our anxiety, is the fact that we can handle these crazy calls. And when that's gone and we don't have the calls anymore, that anxiety just ramps up and the depression ramps up. And then when you have personal things happen to you, you're watching your father with an illness, then yourself, and your mother-in-law is killed by a drunk driver. It just all adds up, and now it's personal. And that's when the glass overflows. And I believe that's where PTSD really shows itself, because it doesn't matter how bad the incident is. It's your brain just saying, I can't do anymore, and it's completely out of your control when it happens. As I mentioned, he did it in the middle of the night. I mentioned in the training, he did it in the middle of the night. There were cameras on the outside of our house, and it was described to me that he walked confidently outside and did it. So that night I was back home, and my family lived with me for a while, and I couldn't leave home because I had pets. I had multiple animals that needed care, and I went to take them out at night, and I couldn't. I've completely froze. I was instantly and unexpectedly now afraid of the dark, and still have issues in the dark. I was very, very scared to be left alone. I was a police officer. I was someone, if we used to joke, Mike and I used to joke, because if we heard a noise in the house, we would fight over who was going to go check it. It was like, yeah, we just thought it was so funny that we both would get up. We were both ready to do what we needed to do. And now I'm afraid of the dark, and I don't want to be left alone. And I hate my house, and I couldn't go in the bathroom anymore. I couldn't go in the master bedroom. I could not go anywhere near my backyard. And it's, when we have a divorce or a loss of a family member, and it doesn't have to be in a tragic way, all of that stuff makes our cups overflow because of what we've been dealing with our entire career. And you never know when that's going to happen. And I'm glad that I took for myself all the steps necessary to take care of myself as well. Sorry, I got off track there.
Yeah,
but
that's an important thing too. You have to take care of yourself in this.
You do.
And
Yes.
that's forgotten a lot. So, Lisa, I give you credit for the incredible strength to tell your story, to go through what you did, and to speak at some of the places you have, and at the conference that Scott was at. By speaking to other police officers and law enforcement officials, and anybody really that will listen, what are some of the key takeaways you think that would benefit the law enforcement community or first responders in general from your story?
Sure. 3 things that I really want to get across is, one is stigma of mental illness, stigma of suicide. We hear that all the time. We see the T-shirts that say, to the person in line behind me, you matter. That's wonderful. But what are we doing when we're together at work, when we're having coffee car to car, and we're talking about that crazy lady we just dealt with on that call who has a service dog, and what a pain in the butt she is, and she's crazy, and all we're doing is telling each other, like the rookie, let's say we have a new guy that's starting and he's struggling. When we talk like that about mentally ill people or suicidal people or anybody that we deal with on a regular basis, we call them frequent flyers. What we're telling our coworkers is, you can't come to me when you're struggling, and you're a problem, and I'm going to make fun of you. So stigma with that. And also when you go home and you're telling your wife your stories about work, she may be fine with it, But what about the 14-year-old son that is listening to this story? Now he feels he can't come to dad, who is his hero, who is a police officer, who he loves more than anything, because dad is making fun of suicidal, mentally ill, or maybe not making fun of, but talking about it in a negative way. That's where stigma is important. Secondly, as I mentioned, how you show up matters. I will never forget those deputies ever. I remember their faces when I see them now. I now am able to smile because they did an outstanding job. Same with the firefighters that were there. I remember them. And how you show up matters. And same with with friends. If you are going to show up at a funeral and say, if you need anything, let me know, make sure you mean that. I have had people not be there for me that said they would. I have had people tell me I'm too much. I've had people tell me I'm a train wreck. And these are people that, and granted, I was going through horrible times when this happened, but these are first responders saying that to me that allegedly care about me. And they felt comfortable in saying it, but it hurts. And I don't get, my feelings don't get hurt that easily, but when it comes to this, it does. So if you want to help
Lisa,
somebody,
that's a great. Oh, I'm sorry. That's
okay.
that is a point that I'm sorry. There's this odd delay. I apologize. I think that's a big takeaway. And this is something you and I talked about on the phone. We talked about in person. We talked about offline. You mentioned that people said to you, "Hey, if you need anything, call me." And I remember the first time you and I talked, I think I chuckled, and it wasn't out of disrespect. It was, I'm thinking back on all the times I've been around death, and I've said to somebody, "Hey, if you need anything, call me," and nobody ever called, right? Nobody ever called me for anything,
Right.
and I almost feel like sometimes we're just conditioned to just say, "Hey, if you need anything, call me."
Yep.
And but I think, like, when I've experienced tragedies in my own life, my dad died when I was 22. He was 49. I'm sure there are people at the funeral, "Hey, if you need anything, call me, call me, call me." I never called anybody. And, in hindsight, looking back, I'm sure we've all experienced that. We've all kept it probably bottled up inside of us because, you said earlier, I don't think you said tough guys, but, I will. We're all cops. We're all tough guys. Yep. We're all type A. We don't need anybody. We got this under control. I don't need blah, blah, blah. And, we're not,
Right.
we're not in a good place. And tell the folks that are watching or listening to this, instead of saying, "If you need anything, call me," you did a great job on the phone with me and at the training of giving some specific examples of how people can actually help and make a difference. If you don't mind, if you could
Sure.
if you could share that, because I think that's important for folks.
Yes, and it does make you feel good at the funeral for people to say that, and it is very kind, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't say that, but after my mom died, I did not take very good care of myself, and I knew when this happened, I need to ask for help, and that is very difficult for anyone to do, let alone police officers and let alone male police officers. I think what helped me the most and what I would recommend is if you want to help anybody that's going through any type of crisis or trauma, is be very specific with your intent and know your own limits. I would never and I could never I had one of my friends' husbands passed away recently, and it was unexpectedly, but I know I could never say to her, "If you need anything, call me." But I will say to her, "If you want to go for a walk one day, call me. If you want me to plant flowers for you, call me." It's a very specific thing that I know I am capable of to help somebody. And that's what, especially with being police officers, we're already dealing with our own problems, family, work. It's a stressful job to begin with. Know what your limits are. You like to fish and you know the person that's struggling likes to fish, say, "Hey, let's go fishing." Instead of just saying, "If you need anything, call me," because you're putting that in their lap and they may not be ready to ask for help. So call them and say, "Hey, would you like to go fishing? Would you like to go for a walk?" I think knowing your own limits and showing up, because like I said, I had people and it did, as I mentioned in the training, I would never harm myself. But what it does is it starts the whole cycle of, am I going to go crazy? When I'm reaching out to somebody for help and they don't respond to me, and then they text me with, hey, I'm on a date, I'll call you later. And I'm crying hysterically. And this is at 5 p.m. This isn't some crazy time. And they just told me if I need anything to call them anytime. All it does is reinforces that you're alone. Nobody understands and nobody wants to deal with you. So if you say it, mean it and know your limits. It really is, and be very specific in what you can do. If you want me to mow the lawn, I'll come over. How about I come over this week and mow the lawn, blow the leaves? That's what helped me, was people doing what needed to be done that I wasn't thinking about. I could care less about the lawn and the leaves and all of those things, but they did need to get done, and people showed up and just did it, or they called. So it is same thing. How you show up matters, and don't just say that if you don't mean it. It's okay. It's okay if you come to a funeral and just say, I'm sorry, or the person's struggling and you just say, I'm sorry this happened to you. That was one of the best things another police officer ever said to me when my mom was killed. He came up to me and he said, I am so sorry this happened to you, because I'm the one that's alive. Sure, she was killed in a horrific manner, but we forget that it's the survivors, and that's what my third takeaway is if you think for 1 minute that by taking your own life, anyone is going to benefit from it, you are wrong. You're absolutely wrong. I get it that suicide is going to happen. As I mentioned with Mike, I think it was inevitable. I think what we did, specifically the peer support and the therapy, helped him immensely, and I think he lived longer because of it. But it almost ruined me. When you kill yourself, if you're thinking that anyone is going to be better off, you're absolutely wrong. It sends a ripple effect. I have, a 22-year-old, 23-year-old niece now, 28-year-old nieces. Everybody is completely traumatized by this. They were very close to their uncle. They're traumatized by their grandma getting killed, and then this, and all of his friends and the people that didn't see it. I'm traumatized because I did see it, and for years I was just helpless in how I could help him. And we need you, and no one is going to be better off without you. And that's just my third takeaway, is to hear that you do affect everybody in your life negatively. Not one person is going to be better off without you. And it ruins lives. It does. I've seen it, and it has ruined a couple lives. And with me, I've lost relationships. I've lost friendships, and I have struggled very, very much just to stay on track. I couldn't keep a job, and it was all out of my control. I couldn't concentrate. And he thought he was doing me this favor. He thought he was going to be a burden, and he thought I was going to leave me to thrive. And that is not at all what he did. And I get it. We say, well, that's where he was, but I'm the one that's left here now, and we have to think of the survivors and how we treat them. And, it's not easy to do when you're in that place. I get it, but there are so many different things to try and do, and be cognizant of our own words when we speak about these things, and just be there for each other in a true way, like we preach, thin blue line, but yet sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't be. I mean, that's spot on, right?
Yeah.
We are not good for ourselves at times.
Correct.
And that last statement too, and as officers, we've talked about that before. You're on a scene and you don't realize what you've done to the family, what you've done to the survivors, thinking you're alleviating the pain, alleviating the problem for them, but not for everybody else. And I think that's something that has to be hammered into people, that anybody that is considering those options, hopefully not, but that is a definite strong takeaway from that.
Yeah.
Lisa, do you find telling your story is, for lack of better words, do you feel like this is healing the right word? Like, how do you?
So I didn't know how I would feel. I've talked about it, with a therapist, with family, with friends. Some of his friends have specifically asked me what happened, because they didn't see it coming. And that's where another issue arises when you're so close to somebody and you're their best friend or you're their mom and you don't see it. And then there's me saying, I knew he was struggling. There's a disconnect. And now the family's like, well, why didn't you say something? And I'm just thinking, how did you not? So I didn't know what talking about it publicly would do. I just knew I had made a Facebook post about what it was like as I left our house. I had to move. I couldn't stay there. I stayed there a year, and I signed the papers for my new house, which is a log cabin, on 1 year to the day he died. So November 3rd, 2024, I signed the papers because I said I got to go, and now I'm here. And I had posted what it was like to leave that house, and it was a house that we built together and we both loved. And it was, as I was leaving, I had some flashbacks, and then I had also just good memories of him. And I listed that in Facebook because I want people to understand what it's really like. And I'm not seeking pity or attention, but I'm pretty transparent and blunt, and we hear all of these cute sayings, and I just wanted to get it out there that this is not okay. I am struggling, but I'm not going to hurt myself, but I'm struggling, and this can happen. And speaking publicly definitely helped me. Seeing people's reactions while it was difficult. Sorry, that was my dog. That's the service dog that's a disaster right now and pacing. She's trying to get on top of me. But talking about it definitely helped me, because if I can help at least one person, if I can help one person or make one person go, you know what, I remember when she said this, or my family won't be better off without me. And there are other ways to try to get help for, with the ketamine, this new magnetic thing that they do, EMDR, all of these things that you can do that have been proven to lessen depression and lessen suicidal thoughts, and to just get it out there and to share my story, that it's not just a story of him killing himself. It affected a lot of people. And I just hope to help people. And also, with me struggling with being alone, I want other people who have experienced this to say, oh my gosh, this person feels the same way as me, or I feel that way and I'm not crazy. It's not everybody's willing to talk about it. So I had a girl at the Cleveland class come up to me and share her story of suicide with me. And it was very difficult to listen to, but she explained what happened and told me the story and said, that it was, I don't remember what term she used, but basically refreshing, I hate, as bad as that sounds, to hear somebody say the words of what she had been feeling. So that's what I want, is just to get the information out there and have people hopefully mostly say how I'm feeling is normal for this. I'm really angry. I've been abandoned, because that's how I feel. But this can't be all for nothing.
Yeah, and I think, your story has a lot of takeaways. First, for an individual, just what you've explained, for an officer. But Scott and I, as chiefs of a department, we're responsible for our people, right?
Yes.
We have to deliver those resources, make them use those resources, and make them available, and not forget about them and the families. I think that's another takeaway from this as well, that you're not alone. And, we talked about stigma earlier, and I think that's slowly changing with this new generation that sometimes can give us fits. I think they're better with the mental health, but it's a culture that is so ingrained. But I think we're making strides. But myself in our department, I don't think we do enough. And a story like this makes me say, my gosh, tomorrow I've got to get on and get this done. It's on the list, but it is important. And I think hopefully that's another takeaway for agencies as well, to make sure they have all this help.
Yes,
and
thank
Lisa,
you.
your story has validated for the last 3 or 4 years now. I think we got a pretty robust wellness program where we've talked about this before on another episode. But my officers are required twice a year to go sit down and actually talk to a first responder wellness. Psychologist is not the right word, but in fact, I'm going next week. My wife and I have to go. We all have to go, top down. And, if I've been what do they call it? They call it a spring wellness checkup is what they call it. And I just can't speak highly enough about the benefits of that, because while while I don't know what officers go in that room and talk about, I do know that it's making a difference, and they're in a better space and in a better place because of that. So it's refreshing as a chief to hear you tell that story to confirm to me that we're doing things the right way.
Yes.
In that regard. So,
and even if the officers aren't struggling at the time and you set them up with the wellness check with a therapist, it's opening that door. So it's building trust between them and a therapist. So even if they don't have something at that moment and they just sit there and talk, it's building trust, and hopefully it's a resource that they know in the future. Hey, I remember I sat down and talked with him or her, and I really enjoyed that. And now they know that it's not such a formal thing that we tend to think a therapy session is. It's talking. And I think the wellness checks, I also think it's very, very important. And I think it's working.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, listen, is there, we're coming up on almost an hour, and this has been, I'm honored that you wanted to come on here and tell the story. I told you before we started recording, I'll say it again now, and I'll probably tell you again in a follow-up email. This story is going to make an impact. This was the first time that you said anything about somebody coming up to you from the Cleveland class. I had no idea that happened.
Yes.
Which proves to me that, what you're doing is making a difference, and I hope that it's healing for you. You've been in your new house now for, coming up on a year, I guess.
Yeah.
And, I got to meet the dog whose name just slipped my mind. What's
Bowden?
Bowden. I got to meet Bowden. But Mike, you'll appreciate this. Lisa told me that the Bowden senses anxiety and fear.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And when the dog came up to me the first time, it was all over me.
I believe.
Yeah, and Lisa looked at me like, "Something you want to talk about?" And I said, "No,
I've seen you drive. I can imagine that dog would be all over the place."
I'm like, "No, I'm going to go back up on stage. I'm going back up on stage in front of 100 people. Yes, I have a little bit of anxiety every time I go on a stage and speak, no matter how many times I do it. So, which I tell you, Lisa, if we have more time, and maybe we'll come back on, and we can just talk about the service animal component, because it was obvious. It was obvious for me sitting in that big ballroom how much that Bowden
is he right there?
She's in front of me.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yep. Now he's in front. All right.
But Lisa, you said, one of your takeaways is if you think suicide is going to make things better, it's not. Is there any other major takeaway that you want our listeners or viewers here to take away from your story that you don't feel like you had the opportunity to cover? Because I want to make sure you are comfortable.
No, those three were those three were the three main things. And, just how we talk about mental illness at work and how we treat the mentally ill while we're at work. Like I mentioned, somebody told me I was a train wreck. I will never, ever, ever seek help from that person ever again. That's where we're failing each other. And that person is a first responder. So what we say matters. And if I just be very careful, we don't want to, we shouldn't do more harm.
Well, words matter, right? Words matter. Just like we teach officers on the street, words matter. It's more critical in these types of situations.
Yes.
Words matter. So, Mike, do you have anything? Closing thoughts?
My goodness. It's tough to close on that. And I hope that people reach out and get the resources that they need.
Yes.
And hopefully even in this podcast, you might be able to post some numbers or something, phone numbers people can call, but get comfortable with somebody you can talk to. And, it's in police work, we do a lot of stealing, right? We don't call it stealing, but Scott's idea of that checkup is something we've started to get in the works. We've got her on contract, and that was one of those things I said, we got to get tomorrow and get this going. But it's ideas like that we share, and then with your story, it makes us know we're going in the right direction to help our people.
Yes.
Very good. Well, Lisa, thanks for coming on the Two Chiefs, One Mic podcast. This has been a great episode. I know we're going to touch some folks here. Hopefully we'll this will make a positive impact. And for anyone who reaches out who may want to get in touch with you, they can reach out through me, and then I'll get you in touch with Lisa. We're not going to put her information out there publicly, but I can help out with that if we need to facilitate that. So until next time, everybody, thanks for tuning in to Two Chiefs, One Mic podcast, and we look forward to our next episode.
We'll see you next week.